Hi all, I have another amazing game, cutting edge, to show you. Leela ID 31676, a very new network for the Leela 30, against the mighty Stockfish 10, which is now available, by the way, on the Stockfish website. And I've installed it myself, which is useful for this game, really. So this is a David Grosvenor time control game provided by David. So 40 moves per 2 minutes with a 2-second increment per move. Leela plays e4, the opening book given, Sicilian defense. This variation, bishop c4, rook b8. Here is the end of the book given. Usually e6 here are actually the main move, and this is thought to be an even position. So rook b8. Okay, knight f3, knight f6, d3, d6 is played. It seems b5 might be possible. Bishop drops back. This position seems about even. So anyway, d6, h3, knight takes f3, queen takes, e6, and now bishop f4. So not castling routinely, putting pressure on dark squares. Is it really the case that e5 is threatened? Well, with the bishop actually pointing at the rook as well, maybe this is more effective than usual. And in fact, bishop d7 was played. We have e5, and now bishop c6, which this was meant to discourage, just hitting the queen. Knight e4. Leela is prepared to accept the possibility of doubled pawns now. Knight takes e4, d takes, so doubled pawns. But is there more pressure on d6 here? b5, the bishop drops back to e2. On dropping back to b3, then that's nasty. c4. Dropping back to d3, it's possible that black could consider f6, it seems. And this position, black should be doing okay. So bishop e2. And here we have d5. And this is where it starts to get really quite interesting. Bishop e7, just to try and castle rapidly, it seems can be met with e takes, and if bishop takes, then rook d1. So that's a nasty pin, winning, basically the queen winning the game, big advantage. So we have d5 here. And white castles. But let's have a quick look again. So in the game, d takes e4 was played in this position, which is the kind of, should we call it, potentially greedy move. So let's look at bishop e7 again, just in case we want to analyze this a bit more. Queen g3. It seems here, if this is the case, if g6, e takes, bishop takes, this is again an advantage for white, this position. If d4 here, offering g7, this is interesting, king d7. For example, if queen takes, then there's rook f8, winning material. So that's interesting to try and get the g file and get things ramped up on the white king. But here, it seems bishop g3, this doesn't guarantee black a dangerous attack. In fact, white is better here, it seems. It seems here d takes e4 is tempting. There is one more move though, more positional, d4. In a way, rook fd1, queen c7, this position. But again, there's actually dangers in this position with black not castling. This is a fictional line now. Just want to show you the dangers. The queen's leaning on the king side, and even if e4 is taken, this a4 is powerful here with the king still in the center. So this potentially really backfires on black. For example, like this, hitting b5 and then doubling on the a file. We can see a gradual kind of backfire scenario where it gets nasty. It's now nasty on f7. This is just a nasty scenario, queen f6. Bishop's dropping back here, because there's things like bishop a5 on the cards, eyeing d8, and for example, bishop takes c6 would distract the queen away from d8. So there's nasty things happening here in this scenario. Now there's rook a8. So these serve to demonstrate it's a little bit scary, the position, if d takes e4 isn't played. So that was perhaps reassuring to Stockfish 10 to take this material. Queen g3 is played now. So yeah, white's leaning on the king side, inhibiting natural castling. Queen c7. And the thing is, can this actually be amplified at all by Leela? Well, we see rook fd1, h6, and now an interesting idea, very interesting, in this position. Can you guess, if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, white to play? Okay, rook d6. This does seem to be the start of a kind of Vulcan grip. Yeah. It seems very difficult for black to kind of get out of this grip. What does black actually do? Does black take this immediately? Black actually played g5. On taking immediately, this position, g7's going to drop. And with that pawn on d6, that's kind of a form pawn, really. And it's pretty devastating stuff. This is just horrible. This position is horrible. There's things like bishop g4 threatened. White's just in the big driving seat there. So we have g5, which seems like a good way to try and hold the position at least. Bishop drops back. So now here we have c4. Perhaps this was black's opportunity to take on d6 here without g7 dropping. Bishop g7, there's h4, and there's a horrible, outcome there. But bishop takes d6 doesn't seem to be worse for black, at least. For example, this scenario, white can force a perpetual though with bishop takes g5, if nothing else. There's that anything else but forcing the perpetual loses. Rook a3 just loses to rook g8. The king's going to escape, but white can just keep up the perpetual check here with an even position. Of course, a draw. So anyway, this wasn't played. So c4 was played. We have bishop h5, and now it's taken. This is under slightly different circumstances, and it's a very unusual position in a way with that form pawn on d6. We could say a centre form pawn. By the way, there is a form pawn t-shirt now available on Teespring. You should look on underneath my videos. I'm hoping one of you will buy that soon. Anyway, enough of form pawns, but there is a form pawn on d6 with the king in the centre. We can argue this is important here. Queen e5 is played. Now black played rook h7. If black castles here, queen f6 is nasty because this pawn chain's clearly crumbling. If queen takes d6, that's nasty to lose h6. And if here, well, again, losing h6, this actually should be, well, an even position. But white can actually play better here, it seems, with rook d1. Just, yeah, keep the form pawn going, even if it's shielded for a moment. Bishop g6, threatening mate. Parrying mate, h4, trying to undermine this pawn chain. White should be doing quite well here overall, it seems. So anyway, according to engines, so king h7, sorry, rook h7 was played. So this looks awkward. So clearly, okay, as well as the form pawn, there's the disconnected rooks. So white's only got one rook, but the bishops, are they working really well together? Well, they cover each other's back, so to speak. Rook d1, king f8, bishop d4. So the light and dark square bishops, the power of the bishop pair here, with the form pawn in the centre. What is actually going on? we have actually the move a5, b3, king g8. The bishop drops back. This is a little bit mysterious. It's like Leela's not rushing to do anything in particular, it seems, with this move. But there is the possibility of b takes c4. And in fact, here, now, b takes c4, as if there might be a greedy intention. It seems the top Stockfish 10 move is, should we say, the greedy way. I've picked up something. I'm experimenting with something Giri was mentioning in the recent World Championship live commentaries. He said, you know, like there's a greedy way, there's some other way, and I thought that was quite an attractive way to describe moves here. If queen takes a5 is the greedy way, though, is a bit subjective because it can lead to beautiful things. The queen can always bounce back after that greed, in inverted commas, to this diagonal, as my variations show. Now, Leela's move, I would say, in a biased way, that this is the beauty move instead, queen f6. Just to show you what initially I thought might have been greedy is actually very, very powerful. Queen takes a5. It's not just about winning a pawn here. For example, bishop d5, bishop g4 with that pin on e6 now means queen takes or rook takes d5 is on the cards with that pin. How does black actually cope? Say here, there's still rook takes d5 because after queen takes, there's still this losing the rook after. So, and the pawn's crashing through. So let's just check this again. Instead of bishop d5 then, bishop a4. This position, you see the queen on a5 is also holding up c3 quite well. The queen can go to c3, and this scenario, g4, it seems again, with the bishop here and the fragmentation of pawns, it's a very interesting triangle actually, visually. I've just noticed there's a kind of triangle of pawns in this variation, and it seems white is doing remarkably well the exchange down here with that form pawn on d6, despite black's extra pawns, quite a number of extra pawns after g takes h3. It seems black is on a slippery slope of destruction here after check. King h2. I'll put a concrete example here on the board. Rook d1, bishop g4, threatening e6 now. Now it's not so casual. And now bishop a3. So there's nasty stuff like taking d7 potentially, queening potentially. So bishop a4. But actually strongest is rook b1, rook g7, queen takes. This is just a variation. It shows that actually, I'm just trying to show that actually the black rooks are not having a great time in these scenarios, it seems. And eventually white can get a really crushing position. So even with the apparently greedy looking moves, because Leela's move, a human bias applied to it, of course, is keeping the queen, like the most attacking piece on the board, next to the king. And just that looks right to do that. But let's see, bishop a4. On queen d8, there's actually d7 here is nasty. So if takes queen with taking the rook, and if takes here, then bishop takes f7. And now if rook takes, then there's queen h8 mate. And if king f8, then there's bishop a3 check. It's all pretty destructive. So yeah, bishop a4. We have rook d2, rook c5. On c3 here, it really doesn't do anything. It's covered by the bishop and queen. It doesn't really have any big impact on the position. White is still doing very well there. So rook c5, bishop e5. So that stops the rook having access to f5 here. Bishop c6. So there's this Vulcan grip on the position, this dark square Vulcan grip, with the d6 pawn in the center. And now, yeah, it seems there's a crowd of pawns around the king, but rook d4 is like basically it's got the underlying motive is to swing the rook to that g file, and given the Vulcan grip nature of this position with the pawn on d6, it seems black is fairly helpless to stop the gradual erosion of like the g5 pawn and the g file being opened up. And we're about to see that now. Bishop d5, h4, starting to use the can opener on black's king, basically. Rook b5, bishop g4. So now there are constant ideas of rook takes d5 if ever the rook left because of this pin. So the rook has to be careful to keep d5 protected. So the can opener starts working its way around the can. G takes. If rook c5, h takes, this position is f3, opening the can like this a bit more, because now queen takes g5, bishop h5, there's actually rook g4. Yep, the can has well and truly been opened here, and it'll be delivering checkmate sometimes now. So, or pretty soon. G takes, though, is played. And now a4, trying to nudge that rook away from d5. The rook is holding d5 up still against rook takes d5. But now the can over carries on this way of peeling the position. So if e takes en passant, then the rook's going to have access to g4 sometimes. h3 was actually played. If e takes, let's just put this in on the board. Bishop h5, c3. There's bishop takes f7 check here. If rook takes, then there's checkmate. And if queen takes, the can's well and truly been opened here after rook g4. Finally, you can see this on the board in this variation, and it's just leading to checkmate. So h3 was played. Bishop takes, but now there's a big idea of f5 in the position. So it's not even just about the pin anymore. It's about accentuating f5, king f8, f5. And what does this mean for white, basically? It means this f file is another road, basically, to the king. King 8, rook d1, the rook. Okay, it didn't get its way via a rook left there, but it's going to use a first rank rook left, basically, now. e3. But first, it's a wily rook. It plays rook b1 first to tease black, to withdraw this rook to defend rook b8. And now rook e1, rook b8, f takes. Now here, bishop takes e6, which wasn't played. This is very good with the idea of rook takes e3. So rook takes e3 is useful, but also basically the g file is also useful. The rook is choosing its file very carefully and pedantically for maximum effect in this variation. So we have f takes e6, and now the rook chooses the f file, rook f1. And it's very, very difficult to parry. The Vulcan dark square grip has a logical, tactical conclusion here, queen f8 on a dark square. There's a certain beautiful logic about this, and it seems black is actually helpless, especially with these two pieces on light squares. It's just, yeah, pretty helpless. This is desperate, because now there's d7 check, winning material. So if queen takes d7, we're back to queen f8 checkmate. So black is shedding material here after queen takes. Bishop down after bishop takes b8. So leaving that rook to be taken, exchange of rooks as well. But bishop down, and now, yeah, exchange of prisoners there, as Nimzovich would say. But now with the bishop up here, okay, it's two pawns, but, yep, now it's just one pawn. And let's see Leela's fine technique. Now it's two pawns each, just white with extra bishop. now extra bishop and pawn, and the king's being kept out of taking that c3 pawn. And here it's adjudicated as a win for white. Yeah, it's a remarkably deep exchange sacrifice. In the variations, Leela chooses what I feel is the most beautiful, which is to keep the queen around the king. I wonder what you guys feel about that, rather than queen takes a5. What is your aesthetic preference, out of interest? Queen takes a5, which might be technically winning and lead to beauty, but queen f6 most certainly leads to very, very logical pawn play, as if there is a literal can opener being opened there around the black king. And this clever rook, teasing, choosing its file carefully in the variations, remarkable. It's such an intelligent rook, not taking no for an answer, basically. And eventually, you know, that big threat, rook f1, when it did land to choose the file, is devastation, winning material. So I hope you enjoyed this game and analysis. If you did, please click top left box, which should appear shortly, to become a member at chessworld.net. You can play against other YouTubers. You can also check this analysis and the updated analysis as I do updates on the improved menu, learn from the masters. Click YouTube order there. Comments, questions, donations, see the description. Like, share, subscribe with the notification bell. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much.